Stand-up comedy is a difficult profession because making people laugh can be a bit of a challenge. Nevertheless, no matter how nervous comedians might be on the inside, they always manage to look like they're enjoying themselves while they're on stage. This is one of the reasons comedian Steve Burr was attracted to this profession. He got his start in the business with a little help from his cousin, who signed him up for the Funniest Person in Rochester contest in 1998. Although he says he was petrified to get on stage, he did and ended up winning first place. That one performance was all it took for Burr to become addicted to comedy and pursue it as his career.
I just think it's one of those things where you're like, yeah, I think I always wanted to try that. You grow up watching guys like Eddie Murphy or stuff like that on HBO, and you're like, man, it looks like they're having a great time, and you just want to try it. And you got to get past the nerves is the whole thing. And you're nothing. The comedian I was then, I wasn't even a comedian, and I was some guy on stage giving it a whirl. But if I go back and look at those tapes, it's nothing like what I'm doing today. So it's almost painful to watch.
In the early days of his career, Burr's attempts to entertain crowds on stage were not always successful. The comedian says that's part of the process, and it's necessary to learn from your experiences. During his first few months as a comedian, Burr was introduced to a heckler and learned that in addition to being frustrating, sometimes these types of audience members can be dangerous.
I think the worst experience I ever had was I got talked into doing it was like a deaf comedy show. And I was literally the only white comedian on the bill. And I think maybe I had a couple of months experience at that point. And they just weren't buying my stuff. And I got into it with some guy heckling out in the audience. And he ended it by saying, how about if I shoot you after the show? And I'm like, okay, that show's over. So, I mean, you know what? I learned from that, don't do deaf comedy shows anymore.
Today, Burr can look back on that night with a bit of humor as he recalls the sight of his cousin, who was videotaping the set, quickly packing his things the moment the heckler made his threatening remark. Another memorable experience for the comedian was a performance at the Improv in Cleveland, Ohio. This time, the mishap came not from the audience, but from an unfortunate run-in with a candle holder.
Before going on stage, I guess the MC was up there, or one of the other comics, and I was sitting at a table in the back, and I was resting my hands on top of the candle holder and putting my, chin down on my hands, and then I just kept, touching the candle holder and touching my face, and I ended up getting black soot all over my face. And I wasn't aware that it had happened, and they introduced me, and I went on stage, and the audience was just looking at me, and I'm like, I said, you guys are really paying attention. But it was more, they were like, what the hell's the matter with this guy? And I did my whole set, and I came off stage, and, the MC brought up the other comic, then he came over to me, he's like, you have black soot all over your face. And I went in the bathroom, I'm like, why wouldn't you tell me that? He's like, I thought you were playing a joke on me. I'm like, how is that a joke on you?
The funny man has come a long way and is currently participating in the Nobodies of Comedy tour. In addition to performing at comedy clubs across the country, he has also taken part in the Comics on Duty World Tour and created his own podcast called 3 Things You Never Talk About. After a decade in the comedy business, Burr is now someone that young comics come to for advice.
A lot of newbies in the business will come up and they'll be like, how do you book gigs? And there's no secret phrase or anything that you're not aware of that I can just be like, you got to call and say blueberries, and then the doors will fly open. It's you just figure it out. There was a time where I sat on a bar stool at it was Hiccups in Rochester, New York, after the contest, and I remember turning to the manager of the club like, how do you book work on the road? And I had no idea. I wouldn't have known where to start. And now, 10 years later, I tour literally all over the world.
The Nobodies of Comedy tour will make a stop at the Walton Arts Center in Fayetteville, April 25th. Steve Burr and 4 other comedians will take their turn entertaining the crowd with their jokes beginning at 8 p.m. Reporting for the Morning News, I'm Antoinette Grajeda.